Uh, the test closed and the class average on the exam was a 71. I would like it to be a little higher, but anytime a test closes in the C's, that's about average or normal for a 100 level course. I did hear from a few people concerned about their test score. So I did go in and look, and 5 people made an A, and another person made an 89.3, which is very close to an A. And so I did feel like it was a pretty fair test. So I wanted to just say a few general things about the exams. And if you're one who struggled on the exam, don't think that I'm judging you or calling you out. I'm offering these as maybe some tips. And just so you know, I have a lot of education. I have 4 degrees. I have a bachelor's, 2 masters, and a PhD, and I was not a great test taker. So I understand the struggles with taking tests. So I say that not to tell you how educated I am, but so much to tell you that it's not always easy for everybody. Some people take tests better than others. We have 1 test left along with the rest of the homework. Before I go into my tips, one thing I should tell you all too is a handful of people did the extra credit, and I'm going to go in and add those points to their score. I haven't done that yet. So I will do that probably this week. 5 or 6 of you went to the Mark Witt thing, sent me the extra credit, and that was this class, right? I'm pretty sure. This class and 231. Okay, thank you. I offered it the 2 classes, this class and 231. So I am going to go back in, and those people who did that, you'll be getting some points back. So if you're one of those people, that's yet to come. I haven't had a chance to. I didn't want to add the points in while the test was still going on. I didn't want to mess up the grading. So some of you have some points coming still that will help with that. So some tips about how to do better. First of all, if you're making an A or B, that's pretty good. I mean, I would say keep up what you're doing. If you're making below that and want to make better, a couple things I would do is I would, as we talk each week, now granted, this is how I would do it. It may or may not work for you. I'm just trying to be helpful. And I'm a little bit older, so not all these steps may be necessary for you. But I'm a visual learner. So like when I was in the 2nd grade, not trying, every time I had a spelling test, I had to write the words out over and over and over and over again. And the physical writing of the words visually made them stick. Now, I'm not comparing this test to 2nd grade spelling, but as a visual learner, one of the things I would do to perhaps raise your scores is, okay, this week we're doing PR. There's like 3 things on the website about PR, I think. Let me pull up. Well, there's something on the origins and the functions. And so I would print the study guide out first thing, and then I would print the origins and functions out. I would read those because I've already told you that more stuff on the website is important than things in the book. So I'd print those out and I'd answer the questions, and I'd have the study guide ready every week. Now, if you had the study guide answered but still didn't feel like you did well, one thing that you might need to do is as you do them and then do the next one and the next one, you just have to constantly be looking at them. And again, I'm not trying to say that we're the exact kind of learners, but for me, I had to study stuff over and over and over again for it to register. So I don't know if that's the issue or if it's just a matter of time. So I would literally print those things out, read them, underline them, answer the study guide. And then next week, do the one for journalism. Topic 12 forward is going to be what's left on the test, our last test. And so that's one thing that would help you. you know, we're going to talk about these people and stuff, but like on the study guide, you know, there's not that much for the PR one. You basically need to know three really important people. P.T. Barnum, who was the circus guy, but he was known as a great promoter. So it's his promotions that we care about in PR. Ivy Lee and Edward Mays were the father of PR. So, you know, as you're listening to things in class, as you're reading the things online, as you're looking at the book, you know, look for those names. And I probably wouldn't just put, you know, Ivy Lee, father of PR. If I was doing the study guide, I might write out like a paragraph. What are the most important things about him? So maybe it's a matter of fleshing out the study guide a little bit more. The things on the study guide are the things on the test. So that's the best advice I have. I don't know if that's very satisfying, but I would do each week's study guide each week. So at the end, you're just reviewing them. I also found, as I got better as a student in my undergraduate level, reading ahead of time, doing my work ahead of time, and then going into the class, things stuck more. You can't always do that, but the more you can go over this stuff, the more familiar you'd be. So that's just, I know I kind of gave that advice last time, but I don't know what else to say about it except to not just write the sheet out, but make sure you've studied, kind of memorized it, understand it. And I know it's frustrating. Now, the other thing I would recommend is that moving forward, we have a PR writing assignment that's due this Sunday. I want to talk about it for just a minute. So here's the assignment sheet. This is due Sunday at 11:55. And what you need to do is you need to read the 4 scenarios, which are on the web page. And then you only need to respond to one of the 4. So it gives you kind of an option. And you're going to write at least 1 double-spaced page for the scenario. You can write up to 2. Don't give me 3 and 4. I don't think that's necessary. And based on these scenarios, and again, just pick one. Maybe you want to write about the child dying in a car, or you can write about the community trying to implement recycling. But don't write about both, because then you'll do a 10-page thesis. And just respond to these questions and give examples. So that's worth, I believe these are worth 20 points, or is it 25? What's it say? 25 points. It's a 1-page thing. You've got all week to do it. Now, granted, I know you have other things to do. But if you can get a 25 out of 25 on this, that's very helpful. And so at this point, I would try not to skip any assignments if you have skipped some. You know, so this you could easily get 25 out of 25 on. So here are the different scenarios. You just need to read those. Here's the rubric I'm grading from. So take a look at that. That'll help you see how I'm going to grade it. So I think at this point, one thing that will help you too is to capture all available points. And then we have Forum 16 today, or this week. I am in the process of grading forums 11 through 15. I'm in the process of grading those. And so work on 16. So if you get all the points for the forums, that's going to make a big difference. For instance, those of you who have made a 30 out of 30 on the forums, that's not in the grade book yet, because the grade book's out of 100 points. That's going to really help your grade. So don't miss the forums. And then there's one other, yeah, there's a media, so there's another 25-page thing, or 25, sorry, point thing. So I guess my encouragement is this: moving forward, try not to miss any of the points. Forums are easy. Really, all you got to do is do them and put a little effort into them. And then 2 more writing assignments for 50 points. That's almost the value of a test. And then, you know, just study longer for the other tests. So, I mean, I don't know that that's very satisfying advice, but I don't know what else to say. The study guides are a tip to help. Does anybody at home or anybody here have any questions about that? Okay. Email me, or we can Zoom or anything if anybody needs any help. Also, coming to class helps. I think it helps the stuff stick. And so, and by coming to class, I also mean Zooming in. Those of you at home are counted present. So I think if you're here in the room or you're Zooming in, that helps you. Okay. So today we're starting a new section on public relations. And one of the things about public relations is that it's a very hard term to define. Public relations, as we know it today, as a profession, really is an American invention that began at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century in America. Promotion and using things to promote an image, that dates back to ancient times. You know, you had Roman emperors who would put their images on coins because they thought it would help them rule vast lands in empires and things like that. And so images and PR, in theory, has kind of always existed as long as man's existed. But PR as a profession is an American invention that began around the 20th century in this country. Now, one of the fastest growing areas in public relations is global public relations. And so public relations is not just an American phenomenon anymore, but it was sort of created in this country, and it grew out of the profession of journalism. And so public relations, it's really, really hard to define because it can be so many different things, and there's no universal definition of public relations. For instance, speech writing, social media, placing ads in traditional media as a PR firm that maybe uses an advertising firm, news releases, stories, media training. You could list dozens and dozens of tasks that are a form of PR. So it's really, really hard to define public relations. And public relations today kind of suffers from a public relations problem, because most people in the public kind of think public relations is, well, maybe that's professional lying, or you're a spinmeister, or you hide the truth. Why do you think people in culture sometimes are down on public relations? What do you think accounts for that? Anybody at home, feel free to chime in. That's okay, we're all tired. And public relations isn't necessarily your field. There are a lot of people that take 101 that, you know, aren't in the mass media field, or maybe you're in a different one. One of the reasons that public relations suffers from some public relations is the way the profession began. And we're going to talk a little bit about their history. We're going to talk about Ed Bernays and Ivy Lee and some of those guys. But when it first began, public relations, there was a lot of disreputable kind of practices that began in the late 19th, early 20th century that are mostly kind of associated with press agentry. You know, I'm going to represent my client and I'm going to get what she wants, he wants, no matter the cost. There's an example of, have any of you guys ever heard of Rita Hayworth? Okay, she was a beautiful movie star. I can't even remember if she was 20s, 30s, or 40s, but early 20th century. And she was kind of yet undiscovered. And one of her agents, press agents, sent her a photograph to a newspaper and said, Rita Hayworth wins beauty contest. And it gets picked up, and she was beautiful, and so they picked it up. And the truth is, there was no actual contest. They just sent a news release and they made the whole thing up. Well, as you can imagine, that over time makes you suspect to journalists and people like that. So Ivy Lee and Ed Bernays, which we'll get more into them in a minute, tried to make the profession more professional. And over time, it has gotten that way. Today, if you were to make up a news release and send it out, you would be shunned by the public relations community. So public relations is kind of hard to define, but it involves a lot of different kinds of tasks. One of the new terms that's associated with public relations is sometimes considered strategic relations because there's a strategy to what we do. And there's a really interesting TED Talk that's only about 10 minutes in length. And I thought we would watch that and we'd come back and get into the PowerPoint. It's called, it's not manipulation, it's strategic communication. Because one of the reasons the public can be down on PR is they think we manipulate them. And good PR doesn't really do that. Good PR communicates well strategically for a purpose, but manipulation is a pretty harsh term. So again, this is just about 10 minutes, but let me get it going. I'm also going to, during this period, I'm going to pause the recording because even though YouTube's kind of available to people, I don't know that I should record a recording. So for people at home that may watch the recording later, I'll share the link to YouTube. So I'm going to pause the recording before I start that recording. Maybe unnecessary, but okay, we're just going to put it on. Can you guys at home see the PowerPoints? I think you can.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so why don't I show you the dove thing? First thing is the antidote the chapter starts out with, but one of the things you can see in that commercial is the power of public relations. So Dove, which basically makes beauty products, I mean, they don't just make soap, they make beauty products. They wanted to kind of redefine their image. And what better way to get people to buy your product than to help them associate your product with making them more beautiful? So they wanted to make women feel better about themselves and redefine how women are seen in society. But it's also very subtle that not only are you more beautiful than you think you are, but if you use our product, you can be even more beautiful. And so it's a very famous campaign. That's just one video. I mean, they did several campaigns, several commercials about women and beauty and Dove. And it's very, very popular, widely known. And you might be thinking, well, you know, that's advertising. Well, Edelman Public Relations, some big public relations firms have advertising firms within them. So yes, advertising played a huge role, but a PR firm helped kind of do the research and the legwork for creating the message. You're more beautiful than you think. That is a very magical message. So that's a really good example of the power of public relations. If you can literally help women and society change the way they look at something, that's very powerful. So public relations has a real power to it. I'm not going to read all these objectives to you. They're in the book for you, but there's just a few I'll point out. We're going to talk today and Thursday a little bit about the current role of public relations in society. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between what PR and advertising are, because they're similar, but they're different. And we'll talk about those differences. Talk a little bit about how the digital world has changed press releases and things like that. Talk a little bit about Ivy Lee, who is considered the father of public relations. But then another guy came along, Ed Bernays, and he proclaimed to be the father of public relations. The truth is, the exact date of when PR began is not agreed upon by all historians. So they both kind of contributed, and they're both a father of public relations. But Ivy Lee is really important, and so we're going to talk about him. World War I and World War II had an impact on PR, so we're going to talk about those. Talk a little bit about public relations and its role on politics and political communication. And we're going to talk a little bit about PR in a crisis and some of the ethics in PR. So some of those are the big memes, big themes in this particular chapter that we're going to touch on a little bit. So we already kind of touched on that. Dove's campaign for real beauty, it was just a very, very noteworthy campaign. It had tremendous impact, and it had the effect that it wanted. It did sort of rebrand that entire company. So the public relations industry is very wide and broad, which is why it's hard to define it. Again, we could list dozens of tasks. I've already talked about a couple of them. So there have been attempts to define PR, and it's not an easy thing to do. But here are some things that probably belong in the definition of public relations. A PR person is somebody who acts on behalf of a client or a company, and they're trying to build a relationship with the public. So it's somebody who has kind of bridges a relationship between an entity and a public. And they try to foster two-way communication. When PR first began, it was a lot of one-way communication. I'm going to send you a photo of Rita Hayworth, and I'm going to make up a beauty contest, and you might fall for it and run it in your paper. But I don't really care what you have to say because I'm the agent just spewing stuff. Well, as PR evolved, it became more two-way communication. PR practitioners wanted to know what the public thought, and it enhanced communication by having two-way. So PR is about relationships that fosters two-way communication with the idea of enhancing the relationship between the entity and the parties. It's really hard to name any industry that doesn't have PR attached to it. I made this a challenge one time. Name any industry that doesn't have PR attached to it. And it's really, really hard. The police have corporate spokespeople, universities have corporate spokespeople, football teams, basketball teams, the city of Cape Girardeau. You just name, they all have somebody who's a spokesperson or works on their behalf. And one person in the room said, well, what about prostitutes? And I said, I'm talking about legitimate businesses. You probably would not have a PR person if you're a prostitute. But you have to go pretty far down professions to get somewhere like that. I'm talking about legit professions. So PR firms, there's a ranking of different firms, top tier firms, things like that. I think we've got a slide about that. And PR has become a real global entity. It has gone from simply being kind of birthed from American journalism to being an American profession to being across the globe, part of which is a lot of corporations are now multinational and global, and so public relations has followed. So here's some of the largest agencies. Burson Marsteller, you know, they have 1,000 to 5,000 employees, and that's their revenue stream. Hill and Knowlton, Ogilvy, those two are some of the best known ones, but you can see they make a little less than Burson Marsteller. But these top three have at least 1,000 employees to 5,000 employees. Then these three, they have 501 to 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000 here. And so you can kind of see their size. It goes all the way down to some PR agencies have one employee. Back before I became a professor, for a 3-year period, I was a sole practitioner in my own communications firm. What that means is I worked out of the house, but I worked for clients, and I would do different projects for them. Sometimes I would go to their offices and work. Sometimes I would consult. Sometimes I would write different things. And I actually made pretty decent money at it. But I was a PR agency of one. And I only did that for 3 years. It was kind of fun. I'm glad I did it. From my perspective, it's more fun to work for an institution that pays you a salary and pays your benefits. But because I like working on my own, but I like the security of somebody else footing the bill. So these are just some of the standalone PR companies. Dialogic theory. I mean, I don't care that much about you learning different theories, but it's a theory about how you communicate with each other. Some of the challenges of the work of PR, I think, is significant. What do you, I feel like I'm doing all the talking. I also understand that the time of semester where nobody wants to talk too much. But what do you think might be some of the challenges of PR? What are some things that make it hard to do PR? Anybody home want to chime in? Yeah, there are some restrictions. Um, I think sometimes clients can be very difficult. So one of the challenges could be, do you um, do you work in a company where you have a boss and it's a PR firm, or do you have outside clients? And so sometimes clients can be very, very difficult to work with and get them to listen to you. I always found it fascinating that a client would hire you, ask your advice, and then not take it. Even today, that's very, very common, that it's hard to get your client to take your advice. And so one of the challenges is the personality of the client that you maybe work for. And maybe the dialogic theory is a part of the challenges, because part of what you're trying to do in dialogic theory is you're trying to make an argument and persuade people to your point of view. And so that can be very challenging. Public relations and the public good. I think one of the challenges is that sometimes people think if you're in public relations that you don't care about the public, you only care about the bottom line. Back when I was a reporter, because public doesn't really like reporters today either. It used to really bother me when people would be like, how could you be a reporter? And it's like, I love it, and it's for public service, and I'm out here gathering information so people can read about it and be better citizens. And I love being a journalist. And I kind of feel that way about PR too, that if you're a good PR practitioner, your organization should consider the public good, if for no other reason than the crass reason that considering the public good is good business, okay? But then also considering the public good is just a good thing to do. You should care about the public. And so PR and the public good is something that a lot of people don't understand, that your goals can align with the public goals and you can still achieve things. I think the Dove campaigns, a really good example of that. Sure, Dove was trying to sell more soap or more beauty products or different lines of things that it was doing. And Dove was trying to reposition itself in the marketplace to make money. But imagine the good they did if they actually did convince some women that they were more beautiful than they thought, because our culture and society is really hard on body image and things like that. All you gotta do is flip through magazines. So Dove, in doing that, it was good public relations, but it also, I would argue, was good for the public good. So that's some of the scope of the work. We'll do this slide and then we'll stop, because I do want to clean the seats and let you guys be able to leave here and get to your next class. But I think we got time to do this slide. So public relations and advertising are kind of like first cousins of the same business. So that's how I like to think of them. They're very distinct. Think about your own cousins. There are traits that are similar. When I go to family reunions, it's uncanny. I have this one cousin who we have the same jokes, and I don't even know how that happened. And we tell the same corny jokes every time we get together. But it's like, I don't remember, I don't know how that happened. And we have the same mannerisms. But we're very different from each other, because her dad was the oldest son in a family of 7, and my dad was the youngest son in a family of 7. And they were very different from each other. So PR and advertising are very different, just like your first cousin. But they have similarities and traits and things that are in common. They have a separate purpose. Advertising is most of the time something you pay for. Now there are things like public service announcements or things that advertising might do to serve the good. But generally speaking, you buy an ad so you can control the message, and you pay for that privilege. I want to put an ad in the Southeast Missourian, declaring one of my books. I want to try to sell my book, so I'm going to get an ad for that. And I have to pay for that, but then I can pretty much control what it says. Public relations is free messaging that you can't control. So I'm going to write a news release because I have a book published, and I'm going to send it to the newspaper. I'm not going to pay anything because it's a news release, but I'm going to hope that they run it. And I'm going to hope that they don't change it around. So advertising is paid for and controlled, and PR is unpaid and uncontrolled. But because of that, PR tends to carry a little more legitimacy with the public. So if I have an ad space that I can buy and control, it's going to be like, well, that's biased because she controlled it. Versus a news release, if I send a news release out and an editor's like, the public wants to read about this, I'm going to put it in the paper. And then the editor edits it, goes through the editing process. It's perceived as slightly more legitimate. I'm not putting advertising down. I don't mean that. But if you can get free media to pick up your message, that is seen as a little more of an endorsement because the paper thought it was news. Over here, the paper just took your money. And so there's a different purpose and a different means. They both should have legitimacy within organizations at the management table. It took PR a long time to get there, but PR people used to kind of be an add-on. We're going to think about what the company should do, and then we're going to, bring the PR people in and tell them what to do. Well, today, a lot of PR people sit at the management table and they help come up with the strategy as well as the messaging. And that's true for advertising as well. So media time and space, that's kind of getting to what I was talking about. You pay for media time and space in advertising, and in PR, you're trying to message it so that they think it's newsworthy and put it in the paper for free. And so that goes back to the whole PR as part of the public good. If you want an editor to put your news release in a newspaper, put it in social media, put it on the TV station, your message as a company has to be something that the public wants to read, see, or hear, because the editor really only cares about their readers or their viewers. They don't care about your company. So your message has to align with what the public wants to see, hear, or read. And so that's kind of how they're different. Public relations in the news drives me crazy. Of course, this is a little picky that they keep calling them press releases, because now they're really considered news releases. Press was back when you really had newspapers and you didn't have TV, radio, because it was a press. But a press release is a news release. And in PR, you send out a news release because you have something to announce. And press releases have changed, news releases have changed through the years. You need to, in news releases, you need to put the news in it and try to be completely honest. One of the things about ethics in news releases is if you make something up, like Rita Hayworth has won a beauty contest, it worked for her, by the way, she got a movie career, but that's, probably not the way to do that. It's seen as unethical. And so news releases have really changed in the 100+ year history of PR. And so the ethics of news releases, you need to make sure there's actual news in it. This is a study that's really old, but kind of about 20 years ago, they did this study asking reporters and editors what they disliked the most about news releases they got from PR people. And they said they don't contain any news. They just send you something because they're trying to get your company in the news, but there's no news. So one thing that I tell PR students when I'm teaching a PR class is, don't ever send news out, or a lack of news disguised as news, because reporters are smart. So you only send news releases out when you actually have news. Back when I taught at Belmont, one of my students, she was a great student, she got a job at a company. It was actually a real estate firm. They'd never had a PR person before, so they didn't really know how to do PR. And the president of the company said, you know what? He said, we're going to send a news release every week. I want you sending something every week, and that'll prove your value. And to her credit, she said, no, she said, we're going to send something out when we have something newsworthy, or we're going to alienate the reporters. They're going to get used to us just sending out garbage. And he actually liked that she stood up to him, and she did really well in that firm. And so that's what I mean by clients, trying to get your clients to understand, if you just send news release after news release after news release, and there's no real news to it, reporters are going to tune you out. You're going to be seen as kind of the person who cried news, instead of who cried wolf. So I tell you what, I think we'll start there on Thursday. So folks at home, I'm going to let you go, and then I'm going to come clean the seats. And hope you guys had a good day. I'm feeling good because Thanksgiving's coming, but we got a little time left before we break. But I'm going to stop the recording and let everybody go.